Hello and welcome. And following that film of Anna's outing with Megan on the shores of Scapa Flow, we have Anna herself with us, along with her two fellow foragers, to answer your questions. Szymon Szyszczykiewicz grew up steeped in rural Polish traditions of harvesting and eating seasonal wild foods, as well as preserving and storing them for later use in a rich variety of ways. Since moving to Scotland 10 years ago, he's continued his foraging and culinary activities, and he now runs his own business, Foragirium, based in Edinburgh and East Lothian. He has a degree in environmental biology. Lauren Lochry has a background in zoology, conservation and horticulture. She's the founder and manager of the business Herbal Homestead, based near the port of Menteith in central Scotland. She was one of the group on the Wild Wonders business development programme run by Forth Valley and Lomond Leader last year, and it led to exchange with people and businesses interested in wild food and medicinal products in Latvia and Finland. And Anna Canning herself is well known for her tireless work to promote a deeper connection with the natural world, work that has enabled many people to benefit from her outdoor learning programs and courses in sustainable plant-based self-care. She has a degree in herbal medicine and carries out research very much current in ethnobotany. And she worked for many years as a freelance translator of German, Hungarian, Spanish and French. She runs her own business in Edinburgh called Flora Medica. Well, between the three of them, they have much knowledge and are looking forward to your questions. And the first one that's come in is about the location for foraging. It's all very well when you have the wonders of the St Magnus Way and the open road in front of you, says the questioner. What if you live in a city?
Well, if I can just answer that, I'm sure my colleagues Lauren and Szymon will also have something to say. But basically, you can forage just about anywhere, even in your own back garden or your back green. There are all sorts of possibilities with some basic precautions. We talk about the 3 R's of foraging, so knowing your rights and your responsibilities about not interfering with wildlife, etc., and not disturbing the plant life, for example, not uprooting things that's illegal without permission, and also just looking out for things like dog poo. And if you're in the countryside, it's not always nice and clean and pristine either. You might be susceptible to having some contamination from pesticide drift. So those are the downsides, or those are the things that you need to bear in mind. But basically, you can forage just about anywhere. Would you agree, Szymon and
Yes.
Lauren?
You mind? I would strongly agree with that. I would also add that I said that last time as well. You just need to get used to environment. Just feel comfortable in a place you live in or your surroundings, and human species are amazing in terms of adapting to the environment we live in. So once we adapt to the city environment, we'll be able to notice things that are still wild or semi-wild or garden escapees. So there are plenty of opportunities as long as you know your environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just getting to know, isn't it? What's already on your doorstep is important. It's a great way to start already, just right outside your local street, your park, your doorstep.
Also, you could work your environment. You could promote growing. You could do things like seed bombing and promoting spreading of the native species. So that's definitely one way of looking at it. Become a steward of your local environment.
Is this about looking a bit differently at the scenarios round about you, for instance, at your back garden, rather than digging up things or spraying them with pesticide, looking at them with a little bit more respect?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as Lauren said, a great place to start is looking at the things you know already and you might trample on every day when you're walking about. I mean, things like nettles and dandelions, clover, dock leaves, all of these things are easy to recognize, and you can get to know them, as Szymon said, in your own local area, the walks that you enjoy taking maybe with your dog or with your kids, Just get to know the plants as they transform throughout their growth cycle, throughout the seasons. And that's a great way into foraging. And it's really not rocket science. Humans and animals have been doing this forever. You certainly don't need a degree in herbal medicine to do it.
It's almost, for me as well, I think there's an initial sort of a green wall, or there can be. So when you're actually taking notice and you're slowing down, you'll get your eye into those little details that will help you later on with the ID. And I think what you said, Anna, about observing even the same plant throughout the year, it totally transforms. So that too, through the seasons, is very important.
Well,
and that connecting and observing on a regular basis is also quite a mindful activity. And that's one of the added therapeutic benefits of doing foraging on a regular basis. It's a really wonderful thing.
I was going to ask you about one or two of those garden ones. Let's take nettles, for instance. A number of people find nettles growing in the back garden. So rather than eradicating them, what kind of benefits could they get from them?
Oh, where do you start? I've done whole talks and whole evenings on nettles, Howie. I better let the others say something first before I start on.
Yes, I would. Do you mind? So yeah, I would start with first, appreciate nettles. They're amazing plants. You can use them as a plant for your own benefit. Like you could harvest and make variety of uses, but also if you're planning to design your garden, you can, just by looking at nettles, you can tell a lot about the land, the soil they grow in. So that's most likely a nutrient-rich, nitrogen-rich place. So there are so many things you could tell about nettles and do with them. So I would definitely, yeah. I'd like Anna or Lauren speak.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I'm just thinking of those fresh tops, of the young leaves especially, and you're wanting to use it through all sorts of dishes that you would, spinach ultimately for me anyway, and so just using it straight in, if you put gloves on, or even the back of the leaf actually isn't that stingy at all. The stinging cells are on the top surface. So yeah, the top fresh leaves, especially in the spring, and the new growth is what you're after there. Put it into soups and things like that. But at the minute, the joy is the nettled seed, which I'll be harvesting and drying, or I have. I'm needing to get more actually, but ultimately I'll dry it out and I'll make it as a sort of a seasoning. Salt and pepper. I mix it in with maybe a bit of chili, and it goes on, any of my dishes that I'll have as a seasoning.
Anna, you were going to mention some things we can make with those nettles?
Absolutely. Well, you can chop a few nettles and mix it in with pancake batter. You can mix some nettle leaves into omelettes. This time of year isn't ideal because it's past its flowering season, and nettles develop compounds that are irritant to the kidneys and urinary tract when they're in flower. So as Lauren said, this is the season really for seeds. But if you're lucky where the summer growth has died back or been cut back, you can get some nice new growth, but you need to get in there quickly because it goes to flower quite soon. But the nice fresh nettle tops that are not in flower, what you're looking for. Nettles have multiple uses. As Lauren said, you can substitute them for any greens in cooking. They don't have a strong flavor, so they're not aromatic like basil or thyme or these sorts of things. So they don't alter your flavors. So you can put a handful of nettles into soups and stews and stocks and really get the benefit of all those vitamins and minerals that can be extracted into the liquid, into the water. Absolutely fantastic. They're really a powerhouse of nutrition, one of the most nutritious wild plants that we have. Absolutely brilliant. Medicinally, they're also really interesting. Keynote uses of nettle throughout the centuries have been as an anti-arthritic, both through its circulatory stimulant function and also through the actual stings. And there's some research going on at the moment to try and harness the power of the stings to develop new drugs for arthritis. But we can also do like the ancient Romans and even modern day Russians and Finnish people do, and get a bunch of nettles and just sting yourself on your aching joints. Really effective for reducing inflammation in the joint. Very, very interesting one. Other things, they're anti-allergenic. So they help the body. They not only have antihistaminic properties, they also seem to have another mechanism of action which is not fully understood. It's being researched, which seems to enable the body be less hyper-reactive to allergens. So very useful in that regard. And eating nettles or even taking nettle tea also has a hypoglycemic action. So it lowers, or rather it's anti-hyperglycemic. It enables the body to balance the sugar metabolism much better. So very useful for people who maybe are tending towards developing diabetes. So really important medicinal uses. And I could go on at length. I've got a little booklet at home that says it's got 101 uses of nettles, including things like nettle ginger beer, which should appeal to many people. But also for making string and rope, and for dyeing, and for coagulating milk as a rennet substitute. As I say, I could go on.
But you know,
I'm sure I left a few out.
Given all these uses, does that explain then why by ruined houses, ruined croft houses, small farmhouses, you actually often find nettles growing there? It's not that the nettles invaded there after the people went. It's maybe been that the nettles were always there and they grew them and got benefit from them.
Probably a bit of both.
Yeah, I'm reminded there, Howie, of even old sort of rubbish areas where we've maybe actually sort of thrown away, and dump areas. Ultimately, the mounds that we find often have nettles on because they're very rich, and actually that can be an indication, as Simone said as well, of the soil type and the evidence of humans having been there and actually having enriched the soil with nitrogen, etc. Yeah.
We've got a question from Richard Oakley about the ribwort plantain. He's wondering about the leaves. I think you mentioned the leaves in the film. What is it actually in the leaves that is special, the substance in the leaves that gives these particular features?
Okay. Lauren, are you?
Yeah,
you look like
sure. I wasn't sure if you were going to chat there. Yeah, it's very interesting because it's got some anti-inflammatory properties, and there's a beautiful constituent known as allantoin that contributes towards that. So it's very sort of soothing. Actually, it's quite mucilaginous, and also there's an antimicrobial as well. It's called, what's it called now? My goodness, it escapes me. But all these interesting secondary metabolites that are very sort of antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, but also that sort of but very soothing and supporting action. So allantoin is quite an interesting constituent there with those anti-inflammatory properties.
We've just got one comment also from Richard on that earlier point about the nettles. Richard says the nettles by his compost heap are about 6 feet tall. So they're definitely getting nutrition. And he thanks you for the ribwort plantain comment as well. And here's a question that's come in from Eric Walker. And it's about how long the flavors last. When you get the harvested, the foraged food home, how long do the flavors last? Is it important to act immediately, or can they keep a little?
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind if I'll quickly
go ahead, Simon?
So it all depends. What did you harvest? What are you planning to do? And how long do you intend to keep the product? Is it the flavor you're after? Is it the nutrients you're after? So it all depends on the process. When it comes to lactofermenting, for example, the flavor would disappear. The flavor of a natural plant would disappear very quickly. If you extract in sugar, let's say if you extract the flavor of a flower in sugar, the flavor could be kept for a long time. Then you could freeze certain things or dry them. Drying usually changes the flavor as well, but not every plant. For example, when you dry mint, it still tastes minty. So I don't think I have a direct answer to this question. So it's complicated.
I totally agree there, Shimon. It is complicated, and it depends very much, as you say, on what active constituents you want to capture, or the aromas, or the how you want to use it. So they're very different methods of extracting and preserving the different properties. Some of the lovely aromas are very evanescent and they will disappear immediately. Things like vitamin C is maybe also worth mentioning. You really need to process your plants, so vitamin C containing plant parts on the day that you use them, or as quickly as possible, and apply as little heat as possible, really to capture and preserve as much of that as you can. So yes, very different approaches depending on what you do and what your plant is in the first place.
That leads into the question of then storage and preservation, doesn't it? And Szymon, I think in Poland, isn't that a great tradition, preserving it in all kinds of ways?
It is. Like when I grew up, we hardly ever bought any food. Everything came from the garden, and even in a summer, following summertime after, so let's say 2020, we harvest strawberries. So even in the summer 2021, we still had some strawberries in the cellar. So it's a lot about this could be directed to developers. Guys, develop houses with big pantries and the root cellars. That will help to build the resilient societies, because this knowledge really helps for people to get confidence and feel safe in their homesteads. But it's just one more thing for related to the previous question. Some flavors can be stored for a very long time. So things like pine resins and stuff like that, and some other things extracted in alcohol, they can be really stored for a very long time. Some flavors.
Thanks, Szymon. That's great. Yeah.
Lauren, just ask you, any particular items that you would preserve, particular ways you'd preserve them, to dry them or pickle them or whatever?
Yeah. Thanks, Howie. Yeah, I'm reminded just of what I've been doing recently, and it overlaps when I was working with Anna as well. We'd harvested some heather actually, and we decided to make it into what's known as an oxymel, which is a sort of a 50-50 mix of vinegar, like maybe apple cider vinegar or white wine vinegar. Half of that with half honey, so nice organic and raw honey even as well. It's got its own antimicrobial and its own sort of medicinal benefits in of itself, some of these vinegars and honeys. So when you add a dried or a fresh herb to this oxymel mixture, it's a really traditional way to capture and preserve these these different herbs, and actually the vinegars and the honey will indeed draw out different nutrients and minerals and things like that from the herbs too. So that's a very traditional one that comes to mind, Howie. Is known as an oxymel. Yeah,
that's right. And at that juncture, Lauren, you've just reminded me, it's worth pointing out to the people who are participating in this event today that we have put together some notes and recipes for you, which you can download from the Orkney Science Festival website. And the notes include Lauren's recipe for the heather oxymel, which is absolutely lovely. Really, really nice thing to make, very easy to make, and include some other recipes from myself and from Szymon as well, that I think you'll find very interesting. So do please go and have a look and download those, and give us any feedback. Let us know how you get on with them.
That goes indeed towards answering a question from Julie, who asks, are there any pocket books on identification that you would recommend to take with you?
Oh my goodness, pocketbook. There are some very small ones. There's a very small Collins version of Richard Mabey's classic Food for Free. I've got a bigger one here. This is an old one. There is a little pocket-sized one that you can get. They're very basic. Another nice one, again, not quite pocket-sized. This one's called the Hedgerow Handbook. I don't know if you can see that there. By Adele Nozadar, and that contains a little bit of folklore, some background to the plants, and some recipes for both foods and simple home remedies. Going back to an early question, she's also produced a book called The Garden Forager. So there are many plants that people grow in their gardens that you can actually eat or make remedies from as well. So that's quite nice. I'm not doing a plug. I'm not getting paid to plug books. But another thing that I would recommend while we're on the subject of books is getting a good field guide for identification, because obviously that's quite important if you want to go a bit deeper with this beyond your nettles and dandelions. So do invest in something like that. It's well worthwhile. There are many, many other lovely, lovely books out there that can help you. Pocket size, you might be struggling. There are some good apps. Apps are being developed and improved all the time. And those can help you with identification and with other information as well. I've put a couple of suggestions in the notes for you there as well. So,
Lauren, any favourite books that you'd recommend?
Well, if we're talking pocket size, there's one that jumps to mind, and I'm struggling trying to remember the author, but it's called A Tree in Your Pocket. And I think they do other things other than trees, but it's beautifully tiny and it explores, medicinal, traditional uses as well as a bit of folklore and history. So The Tree in Your Pocket is a good one that will fit in your pocket. But I think starting out, I've got one beside me. It's an absolute favourite book of mine. This one is known Hedgerow Medicine. That's it there. So you've got Matthew and Julie Burton Seal, and they also do a second one called Wayside Medicine, and again it's really brilliant. So if I flick it open, let's see, you've got beautiful images of different plants, and they'll also give you recipes and tell you a bit about the what it can be used for medicinally, again traditionally. So for me, with that kind of a medicinal interest as well as everything else, that's a good start, but very thorough and clear as well.
And Shimon, any books you'd recommend?
No, I wouldn't, because I didn't learn from books. I learned through experience. Obviously, I use book on occasions, and I use them more as a guide and an inspiration. So I dig deeper in a permaculture and things like cookery books and different skills. And whenever I need to research the plant, then I would go either to the web or talk to people or use the books I have. So I wouldn't recommend the book that would sort all my problems, because I can't name one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough.
And also I the funny thing is that the first book I can remember I've been using, it was a book on the fungi. So when I was a young boy, when I was growing up in Poland, that's the book I was reading all the time. So that's a childhood memory, but now I can't name one. Sorry.
Yeah. It's that sort of on the ground meeting, if you like. The plant is a whole different experience. You can't learn these things in a book necessarily, and it's then when you take notice much more, and these things become more sort of crystallized, if you like, for me, and your mind, and even some sort of inspiration sometimes comes. You might think about, oh, maybe I could use it for this or that. So I really like your point there. It's really a really good point, actually.
Absolutely. And it takes us right back full circle to what we were saying earlier about getting your eye in. So just get to know your local plants. Yeah. Things growing in walls or in cracks in the pavement, just anywhere. Just get to know your plants and experience them. And then you can go and maybe look up some recipe books for inspiration. There are some good things out there, but it's really, as we said earlier, people and even animals have been doing this forever. So, it's not difficult to learn.
But I think it's a good starting point. Is to start substituting some of the parts of the life we live in, the modern life, with a natural ways of living. Once you start to live in a seasonal kind of a life, then everything becomes natural, and then you do research things instinct, like using your instinct rather than doing it methodically like you would do at school and learning things from the book one by one. Because once you got a feel for it, then you know where your knowledge is lacking, and then you kind of you go the way you need to go.
And we're getting some fine comments about the St Magnus Way, saying what an amazing facility it is for Orkney to be able to walk so many miles with such views and such landscapes as we saw there in the film. We've also had some more questions in, but I see that the clock has beaten us to them. And it's time to simply say that tomorrow we will be rounding off Foraging Fortnight with a look, first of all, at slow woodlands in a relaxed Trossach setting. And that's at 2 o'clock tomorrow. And then at 3:30 tomorrow afternoon, we go to Lanarkshire for a short film in an apple orchard, followed by a look back at the great days of the Clyde Valley fruit growing in music and song. But in the meantime, we thank our questioners for planting the seeds, our 3 speakers, Anna, Lauren and Shimon, for helping them flourish, and the technical team for preparing the ground so well. And to viewers everywhere, thank you for listening, and goodbye for now.
Okay.
Thank you.